Welcome, dear listeners, to a place beyond the mountains, where dreams intertwine with ancient magic and whispers drift softly through twilight's gentle glow. Tonight, let us step into a hidden kingdom, a realm ruled not by kings or crowns, but by enchantments older than time. At its heart blooms a garden woven from the very fabric of magic, each petal holding secrets, each thorn a mystery waiting to be revealed. As you settle in, let the story's words drift over you like a warm breeze. Imagine the faint glow of moonlight touching silken rose petals, their colors shifting like stardust in the night. Breathe deeply, releasing the cares of the day, and allow the tale of Prince Alaric and his journey through the enchanted garden to guide you gently toward rest. The kingdom beyond the mountains lay hidden from mortal sight, resting beneath the shimmering veil of twilight. This land was ruled not by kings, but by enchantments older than any throne, and at its heart blossomed a garden woven from the very threads of magic itself. The garden stretched wide, a tapestry of roses in colors unseen by ordinary eyes, spreading their petals under sun and moon alike. Here, amidst thorn and vine, lay the prince's path, though he did not yet know it. The garden was a thing of quiet mystery, one of the old magic left in the world. Each flower, each leaf, and even each stone held whispers of its ancient past. Some said the roses could see into the depths of one's soul, while others believed each petal carried the echo of a wish long forgotten. The air within was thick with secrets, a soft hum of mystery that stirred only when the winds were still, and even the birds ceased their songs when they passed its edge. It was on a moonlit night that the prince, weary and longing, found himself before the garden gate. Prince Alaric was known in his kingdom for his valor and kindness, yet he bore a quiet sorrow, a hollow yearning unfulfilled by courtly life or whispered promises. Though he had been raised in a palace of marble and silver, with every comfort and pleasure afforded him, his heart carried a restless ache he could not explain. Each evening, his steps would take him further from his gilded rooms, his feet drawn as if by some unseen hand toward the shadowed reaches of the palace grounds. On this night, he felt an invisible pull stronger than ever before, guiding him down paths he had never traveled. Pale light spilled across his path, pooling in silver lakes over moss-covered stones. The moon above was full, and it cast the garden in a glow so soft it seemed to breathe. Alaric's heart quickened as he approached the entrance, his fingers trailing across the cool iron of the gate, twisted and wound in the shapes of roses, thorns, and vines. Without hesitation, he pushed the gate open, and the scent of roses, both sweet and sharp, rose to meet him. Stepping inside, he felt as though he had passed into a different world. The roses glowed faintly, their petals gleaming in shades he had no names for. silver pink, moonlit purple, deep forest green, and the darkest, richest crimson. He reached out to touch a nearby rose, its petals smooth and cold, and a shiver ran down his spine as though the flower had whispered his name. As he wandered deeper into the garden, the path seemed to shift beneath his feet, twisting and unfurling like a serpent's coils. He moved from grove to grove, where each cluster of roses held a different fragrance, a different hue, and a different light. The garden seemed to respond to his presence, the blooms lifting as he passed, petals stretching to catch his gaze. Every scent, every shade, called to something buried deep within him, a longing he had carried since he could remember. After what felt like hours, though time slipped strangely here, he found himself in a clearing lit by a strange, soft glow. In the center of this space stood a single rose bush, its roses unlike any he had seen. Each flower shifted colors with a pulse like a heartbeat, blending and swirling in a dance of light. He could not tell if they were blue or red, silver or gold. They were every color at once, a radiant mystery that called to him with a silent, irresistible allure. It was then that he noticed he was not alone. There, standing beside the strange bush, was a figure cloaked in dark, shimmering fabric, her face hidden beneath a hood that cast her features in shadow. She watched him in silence, her presence as still as the roses around her. Alaric felt a strange calm wash over him as he met her gaze, though he could not see her eyes. It was as if she knew him, as if she had known him always. Finally she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper, yet filling the garden like a distant echo. "Do you seek the rose of true love, young prince?" she asked, her tone soft yet charged with meaning. Then came the silver rose, filling him with a strange and serene sadness. He saw moments of loss, love tinged with sorrow, the understanding that love, in its true form, could be a source of both joy and grief. Yet with each rose, he felt the same strange ache, a sense that something still lay hidden within his heart, a shadow that even the light of the garden could not touch. And though the keeper watched him each night with her quiet, knowing gaze, she spoke not a word of what lay beyond these colors, of the final trial that awaited him. One night, as he lingered in the garden, Alaric found himself gazing upon a rose of a color he could not name, a shade both beautiful and haunting. Its petals seemed to shimmer in the twilight, a strange blend of every hue he had encountered, red and gold, blue and silver. Yet there was an edge of darkness, a shadow that lingered at its heart. He turned to the keeper, feeling a chill settle in his bones. "What is this, Rose?" he asked, his voice a whisper. The keeper's gaze softened, a hint of sorrow flickering in her eyes. "This is a shadowed rose," she said, her voice heavy with mystery. "To know true love, you must face not only the light within your heart, but also the darkness. Love cannot bloom until you have embraced the shadow that lies within. Alaric felt a tremor of fear, but the keeper's gaze held him steady. He knew, as surely as he had known when he first entered the garden, that he could not turn back. The roses had shown him colors he had never imagined, but the journey was not yet complete. The shadowed rose awaited, and within it lay the secret he had sought from the beginning. The mystery of love in its truest, deepest form. The night was deep and silent, a velvet darkness draping over the enchanted rose garden as Prince Alaric approached the place where the shadowed rose awaited. He had walked these paths many nights, passing through colors and emotions like a dreamer in a trance. Yet tonight felt different. The air was heavy, dense with an unspoken anticipation, as though even the roses themselves held their breath, waiting for the prince to take this final step. In the heart of the garden, the shadowed rose stood alone, half hidden in darkness. Its petals were dark as midnight, yet when he looked closely, he saw a faint glimmer, a deep, unfathomable violet that shifted like the embers of a dying fire. It was beautiful in a way that felt both mysterious and dangerous, as though it held within it secrets that could change him forever. Alaric's hands trembled as he reached for the rose, his fingers grazing its cool, smooth petals. Instantly, he felt the prick of a thorn, sharp and unforgiving, and a drop of blood bloomed on his fingertip, dark as the rose itself. As the blood touched the petal, he felt a strange pull, as though something deep within him was waking, stirring from a long and dreamless sleep. The garden around him melted away, and he was plunged into darkness, a void vast and cold, without light or warmth. He felt himself drifting, weightless, as if he were falling through the endless night. Then slowly, images began to form, shadows taking shape before his eyes, each one a reflection of himself, yet somehow altered, twisted by the parts of himself he had long hidden away. The first shadow rose before him, tall and proud, with eyes hard and unyielding. It was himself as he had been in the court, guarded and distant, a prince bound by duty and the expectations of others. He saw the masks he had worn, the armor he had built around his heart, shutting out those who sought to know him. He saw his pride, his fear of vulnerability, the walls he had raised to keep himself safe from pain. And in those walls, he saw the loneliness that had grown like a poison within him. As he looked upon this shadow, he felt a pang of sorrow and shame. He had been so afraid of losing himself that he had never truly let himself be found. He reached out to the shadow, accepting it, embracing the fear and pride that had held him captive. The shadow dissolved, and in its place, he felt a strange, quiet acceptance. A weight lifted from his heart. Another shadow emerged, this one smaller, quieter. A vision of himself as a child, wide-eyed and filled with wonder. This shadow was not proud or guarded. It was afraid, yearning for approval, for love that he had never quite found. He saw himself as he had been, searching for something to fill the emptiness within him, seeking comfort in the fleeting adoration of the court, in shallow friendships and hollow victories. This was the part of him that had feared he would never be loved for who he truly was, that had whispered doubts into his heart, even as he wore the prince's crown. A tear slipped down his cheek as he looked at the child before him, the lost, lonely boy he had once been. He knelt, reaching out to this shadow as well, feeling a deep ache within him, a longing to heal, to let go of the fear that had haunted him. And as he held the shadow close, it faded, leaving behind a sense of peace he had never known. The last shadow rose before him, a dark and terrible thing, shaped from anger and grief, from every disappointment, every betrayal he had buried deep within his heart. It looked at him with a gaze cold as ice, filled with the bitterness he had carried, the resentment for all he had lost. He saw in this shadow the pain he had never dared to acknowledge, the sorrows he had hidden behind his princely mask. For a long time, he stood before this final shadow, unable to move, unable to look away. He knew that to find true love, he must not only accept the light, but also the darkness within himself. And so, with a courage he did not know he possessed, he opened his heart to the pain, letting it wash over him like a storm. He felt the sting of every loss, every wound, but as he accepted it, the anger and sorrow began to fade, dissolving into the darkness. As the shadows vanished, the void around him began to fill with light, soft and warm. He found himself standing once more in the garden, the shadowed rose in his hand, its dark petals transformed, shimmering now with a gentle, steady glow. It was neither dark nor light, but a perfect union of both. A rose born from every color, every emotion he had faced. The keeper appeared before him, her gaze filled with pride and quiet understanding. She looked at the rose in his hand, nodding as though she had known all along that he would find his way here. "You have faced the shadow of your heart," she said softly. "Only by embracing both light and darkness can you understand the true nature of love. For love is not merely a reflection of our joys, but a mirror of our sorrows. It is the strength to stand in the light and to face the darkness, knowing that both are a part of who you are." Alaric looked down at the rose, feeling its warmth in his hand, and for the first time he felt whole. The garden around him seemed to glow with a newfound light, the colors of the roses brighter and more beautiful than ever before. He understood now that true love was not an ideal, not a perfect dream, but a journey through every color of the heart, a path that embraced both joy and sorrow, light and shadow. And as he gazed into the eyes of the keeper, he felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that this journey had brought him closer to his truest self. The rose in his hand was a reminder, a symbol of all he had learned, and as he held it, he knew he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The garden felt different as Alaric stood alone, holding the shadowed rose now aglow with a soft, mysterious light. The night air had grown still, heavy with a silence that held its own secrets. As he gazed at the transformed rose in his hand, he could feel the weight of the final trial pressing upon him. A sense that the heart's truth still lay hidden just beyond reach. He knew now that the journey of the soul was a labyrinth with many paths, some veiled in shadow, some lit by fleeting light. He looked up, expecting to see the keeper watching him from the edge of the clearing, but she was nowhere to be found. For the first time since he had entered the garden, he felt truly alone. The shadows around him seemed deeper, darker, as if the garden itself were holding its breath. The roses, usually bright and vibrant, appeared muted, their colors dulled, as though a veil had been drawn over them. A strange feeling washed over him, a sense of being watched, but not by the kindly gaze of the keeper. This presence was colder, more distant, and as he turned, he saw a figure standing in the shadows, half hidden among the roses. It was himself, yet not himself, a shadowed likeness, dark and unyielding, with eyes that burned like embers. The shadow Alaric stepped forward, silent and stern, its gaze piercing and unreadable. In its eyes, Alaric saw fragments of his own desires and fears, his longing for love twisted into something raw, sharp-edged and relentless. It was a mirror of his own heart's ambitions, yet stripped of gentleness, showing him a version of himself that cared only for possession, for control, for conquest in the name of love. For a long moment, they stood face to face, the prince and his shadow, each one locked in the other's gaze. The shadow's face was a mask of hardness, and in it, Alaric saw the dangerous edge of love turn dark, the way it could bind, consume, and break. He had seen himself as a child, longing for love, as a prince, shielded from pain by his pride. But he had never looked into this aspect of his heart, the side that feared love's loss so deeply, it would seek to hold it captive. The shadow spoke, its voice a whisper that cut through the silence like a blade. "Why do you seek love?" it asked. The question as sharp as the thorns on the roses surrounding them. Is it to be seen, to be cherished, or to possess what you fear will leave you? Alaric felt a chill run through him, the weight of the question heavy in his chest. He realized then that love held a paradox, an impulse to give freely, yet a longing to hold close. He had walked the garden seeking love, but he had not faced the darker truth of his heart's desire, the fear of losing something once held dear. Steeling himself, he looked into the shadow's eyes, acknowledging the truth he had not wanted to see. Yes, he whispered. I have feared love's loss. I have wished to keep what I hold dear, to protect it, even if it meant binding it to me. But I understand now that love cannot be chained. It must be free, or it withers. The shadow's gaze softened, and for a moment, a flicker of understanding crossed its face. It stepped back, fading into the night, leaving Alaric alone once more, the rose in his hand still pulsing with a soft violet glow. In that moment, he felt a deep release within himself, as though a weight he had carried unknowingly had lifted, and he knew he had passed the trial of the shadowed rose. But as he turned to leave, he felt a presence behind him, a warmth that filled the air like the first light of dawn. He turned to see the keeper standing before him once more, her eyes filled with a tenderness he had never seen. You have faced your heart's deepest fears, she murmured, her voice softer than ever, like the rustle of leaves in a breeze. Only in embracing both light and shadow can love truly bloom. Love must be both free and cherished, fierce and gentle. You sought to find love, but to hold it, you must be willing to lose it. True love can only grow in open hands. Alaric looked down at the rose, its petals shining with a light that was no longer dark, but filled with every color he had seen in the garden. It was beautiful, a plume of light and shadow intertwined, a perfect balance that reflected the journey he had taken. With a sense of reverence, he held the rose to his heart, feeling its warmth spread through him, filling him with a peace he had never known. In that moment, he understood the keeper's words, that love in its truest form was not an achievement or a possession, but a journey, a balance of freedom and closeness, of trust and surrender. The keeper stepped forward, placing her hand over his, her touch light yet grounding. You are ready, she said. This rose is a symbol of what you have learned. Carry it with you and let its light guide you. Remember, love is not merely a feeling, but a choice, a path that must be walked every day. Alaric nodded, feeling a deep gratitude welling up within him. He looked into the keeper's eyes, feeling a sense of completion, as though the garden itself had become a part of him. The keeper smiled, and for a fleeting moment he thought he saw her true face, a glimpse of kindness and wisdom, before she faded into the garden's shadows once more. As he left the clearing, the roses around him seemed brighter, their colours more vivid, as if the garden had come alive in a new way. He knew that he would carry the shadowed rose with him, not just as a memory, but as a reminder of all he had learned. The prince walked away from the enchanted garden, no longer seeking love, but understanding it. His heart forever changed by the colors and shadows he had embraced. The path before him was still uncertain, but he felt ready to walk it, carrying within him the rose of true love. A love that was not bound by fear, but rooted in the freedom he had found within his own heart. As dawn broke over the enchanted rose garden, Alaric felt the warmth of the first light touch his face, a gentle brush against the shadows he had finally come to accept. The journey through the garden had left him feeling both weightless and rooted, as if he had shed an unseen armor he had carried his whole life. The rose in his hand, the bloom of both shadow and light, seemed to pulse with its own quiet heartbeat, as if alive with the mystery of everything he had faced. He looked down at the rose, its petals shimmering in hues beyond description, a color that held every other color, a light that bore both darkness and dawn. It was not merely beautiful, it was true, reflecting the depths of his heart with all its flaws and brilliance. Alaric knew that this was more than a gift from the garden. It was a piece of himself, a manifestation of his journey through love and fear, joy and sorrow. It was a reminder that he could carry love within him, unbound and free, a bloom that needed neither possession nor control to survive. As he turned to leave the garden, he felt a gentle tug, a breeze that whispered through the roses, like a soft sigh, pulling him back for one final glance. In the distance, he could see the keeper standing in the shadows, her figure barely visible beneath the dappled light of the trees. Her presence was comforting, yet distant, as though she were a part of the garden itself, a spirit bound to its eternal mystery. Alaric approached her, his heart full of questions and gratitude. The keeper's face remained hidden in shadow, but her voice drifted toward him, carrying a gentle warmth. "You have walked through every color of the heart," she said, her tone soft but resolute. "But remember, love is a journey that continues beyond this garden. Each color you have seen, each shadow you have embraced, will appear in your path again, for love is an ever-turning wheel." He nodded, understanding her words in a way he hadn't before. Love was not a destination, not something to be found and held, but a journey, a path of constant growth, one that he would walk his whole life. "Will I ever see this garden again?" he asked, feeling a strange ache in his chest as he looked around, trying to imprint every detail of the enchanted roses into his memory. The keeper tilted her head, a smile evident even in the shadowed veil of her cloak. "The garden lies not only here but within you. Wherever you go, it will be with you, as long as you carry the rose of truth and love in your heart." As she spoke, Alaric felt the weight of her words settle deep within him. The garden, he realized, was not bound by walls or gates. It was a part of him now, a quiet sanctuary he could return to in times of need, a reminder of all he had learned. With a last look at the shimmering roses, he turned away, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and joy. A bittersweet farewell to the place that had shown him his heart's deepest truths. He passed through the garden gates, back into the world he had come from, but he knew he was not the same man who had entered. The colors of the roses, the fierce red of passion, the golden warmth of joy, the blue peace of companionship, and the violet shadows he had embraced, would be his guide, a map of the heart he would carry with him. When he returned to his kingdom, his people noticed a change in him. He was still Prince Alaric, noble and kind, but there was a new depth to his gaze, a quiet strength that had not been there before. He ruled with compassion, yet he allowed himself to be vulnerable, to be open to both love and loss. He sought not to hold power but to serve, finding fulfillment in the happiness of others, in the joy of connection, in the freedom that came from loving without chains. Years passed, and though he was loved by his people and had those he cherished close by, he never spoke of the enchanted rose garden, nor of the journey he had taken within its twilight beauty. It remained a secret, a quiet truth he held close, something he could not explain, yet knew to be real. He would sometimes hold a rose he had carried from the garden, a rose that never wilted, its colors as vivid and enigmatic as the day he had found it. And when he looked upon it, he felt the garden stir within him, a living memory of his journey. There were days when he felt the ache of loneliness, nights when he longed for a love that went beyond what the world could see. But whenever those shadows crept upon him, he would look to the rose and remember the keeper's words. Remember that love was a path that held both light and shadow, both joy and sorrow, and he would feel the presence of the garden surrounding him once more, a quiet reminder that he was never truly alone. In time, he came to understand that true love was not a single bloom, but an ever-growing garden within his heart, a place he could tend and nurture, a place where every color of the soul could flourish. And though he could never return to the garden he had once wandered, he knew that it was with him, as real as any memory, as alive as the love he carried within.